Welcome to the Manufacturer and Business Association's Member Engagement Virtual Briefing. This is part of our ongoing monthly webinar series that we're offering both to our members and people who are considering membership. Now, my name is Patty Welther, and I'm on staff here at the Manufacturer and Business Association. And before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody that your microphones are muted and we are recording today's webinar. Now, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. At the top of your screen, you'll see a dialog box where you can ask a question, or you can raise your hand and we'll make sure to unmute you and you can ask your question that way. Now, today's topic is on mastering difficult conversations. Whether those conversations are related to issues related to COVID or not, today's webinar will help you with those conversations. Now, if you've participated in our engagement briefings in the past, you might recall that I typically talk about a benefit or two of being a member of the Manufacturer and Business Association, just to remind those of you in case you're not aware of all the membership benefits. Now, today we have Workpartners presenting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Workpartners programs that are available to you with your membership. Now, as you can see on the slide here, Workpartners does offer a variety of products and services to help build person-centric workplaces with healthy and productive employees. That's what we all want, right? Now, there's numerous ways in which they can assist companies. And as you can see, Workpartners focuses on the 4 different types of ways and services right here, whether it's analytics, advocacy, absence, or technology. Now, your membership specifically with the Manufacturing Business Association does offer you a discount with the EAP services that are offered through Workpartners. It's a 10% discount if you're a member of the association. And these EAP services can help you with things for your employees related to stress, financial concerns, family issues, and workplace conflicts. Now, this obviously can help your employees' performance and their wellness. An employee assistance program, also known as an EAP, is obviously a very powerful benefit, more so today than ever, that can show that your workforce, that you're committed to their overall well-being, whether it's emotional, financial, or a family type of a concern that your employees are dealing with. Now, Keith Eller from Workpartners is on today's webinar. He's going to answer any questions you might have about the EAP program after today's presentation. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our speaker today. I know I'm going to mess your name up, Amy, but it's Amy Skukalek. I think I said it right. She's a program manager with Life Solutions EAP. Her areas of specialty are organizational development and leadership. Her background includes working with Fortune 500 companies, and she has worked both in the corporate sector and the human services field. She's been responsible for leading and coaching teams as well. She has her undergraduate degree from Penn State and her graduate degree from Slippery Rock University. And now, without further ado, Amy.
Amy, you're on mute on your end.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do it every time. It doesn't matter. But thanks so much, Patty. If you guys would just bear with me for 1 minute, I'm going to pull up my slides. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my slides. As Patty said, she did my name perfectly. My name is Amy Skukalek, and I'm one of the program managers with Life Solutions EAP, which is your employee assistance program. Today, we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about difficult conversations, how to manage them, how to have them. We'll actually go through kind of a step-by-step template in order to have the most productive, difficult conversation that you can have. And I understand nobody wants to have these types of conversations. So unfortunately, we put them off sometime, even though we know it's in the best interest for ourselves, for our team, and for our organization. So I'm going to take myself off camera here, and I'm going to come back on later in the presentation. But it's interesting with difficult conversations, right? Because it's one of these situations that we've never actually learned how to do it properly. I was speaking to my sister recently about some of maybe the failings of our public school education or our college education or private school education, that we never actually take the time to do some type of social skills class where we learn how to have a difficult conversation, which is unfortunate because we have to have these a lot, whether it's at home or at work. And when we put them off, the situation can be really debilitating for ourselves and for our team. And there's definitely some alarming statistics that back this up, right? We spend 2.8 hours per week dealing with conflict. And in some of my previous roles, I think that number could be potentially way higher depending on who we work with and where we work. 33% of employees report that the conflict has led to personal attack or even injury. And we can really attest to this at the EAP. I mean, we get calls for people that have had some type of physical altercation because of difficult conversations or conflict at work. And this statistic doesn't mean an actual physical altercation necessarily, but a personal injury, you know, saying something to somebody that harms somebody else is very real and very valid. 22% report that a conflict has led to illness or absence from work. Of course it does, because we don't want to go to work if we know we're going to walk into a situation that's rife with conflict. And 35% of employees voluntarily leave their job due to conflict. And think about yourself, you know, think about times that you have left previous organizations, whether that was a result of your direct management and how they've handled conflict, or just working in a toxic environment. So I think these statistics are pretty alarming. And again, it solidifies, you know, our need to be able to have these conversations productively and overcome some of the fear that we all have. I know if you're like me, I was in leadership roles for such a long time and I got better with it over time. But I never was quite comfortable or never certainly excited to have any of these conversations that were a little bit tough. So guys, a lot of the information today is taken from the book Crucial Conversations. This book is one of those tried and true books. It's been around for a long time. It is one of the, kind of forefront of the industry when we're looking for literature and books that talk about difficult conversations. So if you have not read that before, definitely recommend that you do. It'll play nicely with everything that we're going to be talking about today. But what defines a difficult conversation? It's one of those things, we know it when we see it, but typically it's a situation where opinions are going to vary greatly. Emotions are running very high. The stakes are high. Maybe you have to talk to somebody about their performance or their performance review. Maybe their annual bonus or raise is on the line. Maybe the topic is sensitive. Maybe you've had to have a conversation before about personal attire or hygiene. It can be really embarrassing and really uncomfortable with both parties. So how do you do that correctly? So we have a wonderfully small group today. So typically in this presentation, I would talk the majority of the time and leave some time for questions. But I will just say, if anybody has anything to add, because we have such a small group today, please feel free, like Patty said, to go to the top taskbar and there's a little smiley face with a hand. If you toggle over it, there's a raise your hand function. I'd be happy to call on anybody throughout this presentation. But, you know, ask yourself, have you ever had a tough conversation, or has anybody ever had a tough conversation with you that turned out to be a blessing in disguise? Maybe it was uncomfortable, but you or the other party really flourished as a result of that conversation. And I definitely can. I remember a time, I know, I think a lot of you guys are up in Erie, But I worked for Gateway Rehabilitation. It was my first professional job out of college. And for those of you that aren't aware, Gateway Rehab is an inpatient drug and alcohol facility. So my particular role was as a therapist working with individuals, addicted individuals who were just coming from detox, and they were staying with me as their therapist for 21 or 28 days. So as you can imagine, it was a pretty stressful and tough job. And in that particular time in my life, I mean, here's what I have to say about Gateway. Nobody was dressing in business attire. It was sort of a casual environment. And I say this because I was up for a small promotion and thought I did really well in the interview process, but I ended up not getting the job. My boss's boss came to me and sat down and had a talk with me about why I didn't get the job. And one of the things that she said, to my incredible embarrassment at the time, was that I dressed unprofessionally. Of course, my initial reaction was to be embarrassed, be defensive. Nobody really dressed extremely professional there. We did a lot of like activities and stuff with our patients, but the way she came across in when she had this difficult conversation with me was incredibly empathetic. It was kind. She talked about her own perspective and how maybe this had held her back when she was a little bit younger or just starting out. It didn't take away from the fact that I still to this day don't know if I shouldn't have got promoted because of my attire. That's neither here nor there, because I internalized everything she said and I made that change. And soon after, I got the promotion after I made that change. But for me, that was a really good conversation that probably helped me in the rest of my career. And tough conversations can be the best if we have courage to do it. More than 65% of US employees say they actually want to receive more constructive feedback. People don't want to have a constructive feedback conversation once a year during their performance review. That's a surefire way to get people pretty defensive and ask, why didn't you have this conversation when it came up? And, looking back on the tough conversation I had with my leader, I wonder that too, if that was something that may have hindered me moving forward. I obviously had a complete blind spot about it. Why didn't they talk to me about it? So if you see you see something going on with your employees that might hold them back, it's your responsibility as a good leader to bring that to their attention and to have that difficult conversation with them. Blind spots will continue to follow people around because they are blind spots, right? People might not know that they have a skill gap in a particular area. So because we have such a small group, has anybody ever had a difficult conversation or received difficult feedback that was really constructive and kind of helped you through the course of your career? If you're comfortable, just come off mute or put it in the chat. All right, and that's okay. I know sometimes having a small group makes people not want to talk even more, so I completely understand that. But if you think of anything, feel free to put that in the chat.
Hey,
Sure.
It's Pat.
Hi, Patty.
Lost your video, so I don't know if you want to.
Oh no. Okay, so you can't see my slides going back and
We can
forth.
see you. We can see your slides. We can't see you.
Oh, I turned my camera off initially.
Okay, that's fine then.
No, I just turned my camera off during the conversation because, to be honest with you guys, I distract myself when I'm looking at myself talk.
Okay.
No problem. But I will certainly come back on towards the end of the presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So I want to ask you guys, think about how we all handle difficult conversations, especially if they don't go well, or before we, as we're in this process of thinking about having the difficult conversation. A lot of us brush it under the rug. We literally sit down and pray and we hope the situation corrects itself because we're so nervous to actually open this can of worms. We will convince ourselves. I definitely do this in my personal life a lot. Like I'll convince myself that addressing a certain situation situation is going to make it worse. So what's the point? Now, I mean, there does come a point where we have to choose our battles. And if we're being incredibly nitpicky, that's not the best time to have a difficult conversation. But if it is something that's really impacting our team, impacting the values of our organization, or in a personal situation, if it's really hindering the relationship, we need to have it. But we'll convince ourselves that we shouldn't have it. So many times we're unprepared to handle it. And I mentioned this at the beginning. I mean, we've never really learned how to do it. And I think the biggest thing is that we neglect to practice. Difficult conversations are one of these things that, they have to happen on the fly sometime, but in many situations, we have plenty of time to sit down and practice and do role plays, write the conversation down so we can be more equipped to handle it. But a lot of times we don't do it. We think that we're just going to be better if we just, going to go for it and address it on the fly. And that's not the best thinking when we're having a conversation when the stakes are so high. And then how do people typically react if we handle a conversation poorly as a leader? I mean, people are almost always going to feel embarrassed. People are going to get defensive. And here's the thing. It's normal for us to get defensive. Anytime we encounter any type of threat, our brain chemistry, brain science will say it's normal to get defensive. Of course, we're going to defend ourselves. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but one of the things that you should never say to somebody is don't get defensive. Because what you do is you back another person into a corner, and anything that comes out of their mouth is going to be very guarded. They might shut down. Don't say don't get defensive. And please keep in mind that getting defensive, it's a completely normal biological reaction to anybody feeling like they're being threatened. People might react with anger. It's important to know everybody on your team. And hopefully you've gotten to the point where you can kind of predict the way certain people will react, because we all have default reactions to things. Some people react with anger. They might storm out. Other people might shut down. If the conversation is handled poorly, though, almost everybody is going to feel that they're inferior at their job, and productivity is going to certainly decrease. I want you to think about a time where somebody brought something up to you or had a difficult conversation. Maybe it didn't go very well. Do you know how you replay that conversation in your mind over and over and over again, thinking about what you could have said, what you should have said, how you should have handled it? People do that all the time. So if you have a conversation with somebody that doesn't go well, their productivity for the day is absolutely going in the gutter. And if these conversations are handled poorly over and over again, I mean, people are going to look for an opportunity, a different opportunity, because the current opportunity that they have is probably so frustrating to them because they don't feel heard. And that's going to be a common theme. People want to feel heard. You don't have to agree with them, but you do have to hear what they have to say. So take a look at this picture. You can almost certainly feel the emotions that people are dealing with at this particular time, right? This is like a picture of a camera crew out in the wilderness, and they see a big grizzly bear coming at them. You probably know immediately that their heart is racing, their blood pressure's up, they're probably shaking, and their fight or flight mode has kicked in, and they're getting the heck out of there. Difficult conversations are almost always going to go bad when brain science comes into play here and people are thrust into fight or flight mode. Guys, we're always going to be thrust into fight or flight mode at the beginning of a difficult conversation. It's almost always going to happen because remember, biologically, anytime we encounter a threat, our amygdala, which is the old prehistoric part of the brain, is going to send a signal out to the rest of our body, indicating to us that there is a threat at hand. Now, the fight or flight mode, it was designed, for life or death situations. And it's a wonderful thing that we all have if we've ever been in a life or death situation. Getting thrust into this fight or flight mode can save our lives, right? We're going to figure out with a split second without even thinking about it, whether we should run away, whether we should fight back. The problem is, though, in the modern world or in the work situation, most of these situations that we encounter are not one of a life or death situation. They're more of a cognitive threat. So this is going to happen automatically. The minute that you start telling somebody that they're not doing something correctly or that they need to change their behavior, this mechanism is going to kick in. So you have to really keep that in mind. Your entire goal is to make sure that as you're talking to somebody, that you actually kind of calm them down. Because if you're heightening that stress response, if you're heightening the threat that they're already feeling, the conversation is going to be basically pointless. It's like talking to somebody that's drunk. What happens during fight or flight is our amygdala is completely hijacked. And remember, I said this is the emotional control center of the brain. So our emotions take over. We're not able to think logically. We're not able to say or do things that are based on reason and logic. That is more a function of the prefrontal cortex, which is a newer part of the brain that helps us with rational thinking. But our amygdala has now taken over everything. So I just want you to keep that in mind. This is out of people's control a lot of times. Your job as the leader is to make sure that as you're talking to somebody, you're talking to them with empathy, you're listening to them, they're being heard. So the conversation goes from that initial feeling of threat to one of you as the leader supporting them. And that's a big, crucial difference. So I think one of the biggest, most important things, let's try not to have difficult conversations at all. That is a proactive approach. How do we get to the point where we don't have to have these conversations? And I think a big part of that is just making sure that we're focusing on people's strengths. How often, if you're talking to somebody about a skill gap that they might have, for example, or their behavior, how many times have you also talked to them about the things that they're doing correctly? How many of you on this call have had a thought in your brain before saying, you know what, anytime I screw up, I hear about it, but the things that I do right every single day, I never hear a word about it. Guys, people are going to live up to expectations for good or for bad. And I mean, think about your own self in your own life. If somebody tells you that you're good at something, there's a really good chance that you're going to improve it. You're going to get better on it. We have a need, a biological need to please and do our best and do well. But when somebody's always like, beating you down day after day, telling you and pointing out all of the things that you don't do right, it's just not a really great philosophy. And I'm not saying there aren't times that you have to address these situations, but I just want to ask you, how often do you give praise? Do you give positive feedback? It's really important. And I will just say a big part of my past career, I did a lot of marriage counseling before. And if any of you have ever been in marriage counseling before or know somebody that has, typically it's because one or both parties need to do something that they're not doing that the other person wants them to do. And if you go to a good counselor will tell you probably at your first meeting, what I want you to do for the entire week is to quit pointing out all of the things that that person does bad and start pointing out all of the things that that person does good. And it's amazing the behavioral changes that follow that. When people feel appreciated and they feel that they're doing something well, usually all behaviors tend to follow that. So it's not an answer for everything, but just keep in mind, focusing on strengths is a really important and proactive approach that we can employ so we don't have to have difficult conversations all the time. So as we're thinking about sitting down and having this conversation, especially if you have time to plan and prepare, you want to think about some different things. You want to ask yourself, what's the purpose? And that's a real legitimate question. Is the purpose because you really like this employee or this person and you want them to do better? Or have you gotten to the point where you need to manage them out of the organization? I mean, what is it really? Is your purpose to be supportive of them? Is the purpose to be punitive? And I mean, neither was better than the other, but you do have to have a clear purpose going into the meeting. Are you making assumptions? So, if Lori was late on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of July, Are we making the assumption that Lori doesn't care about her job anymore, that she's a bad employee, is looking for another place? Or are we making the assumption that, hey, this really isn't like her. Maybe there's something going on in her life. So you need to ask those questions. Are there any buttons that this person is pushing in you? Have you contributed to the problem in any way? And certainly you need to plan for the unexpected. So guys, sometimes in my meeting, this particular slide gets met with a little bit of controversy. So if anybody disagrees with this, feel free to speak up about it. But crucial conversations and a lot of research will say that we actually need to set up the meeting and we need to ask permission for the meeting. And we need to be upfront and honest about why we're having the meeting with somebody. So I'll give you an example of this. Maybe about a month ago, my boss, who I don't typically have a lot of interaction with, he sent me an email early in the morning and he said, "Hey, Amy, do you have some time to talk today around 4 o'clock?" That's all it said. And I wrote back and said, "Sure, I'm available. Should I prepare for anything? What do you want to talk about?" And he never wrote back. I was like, I did nothing that day. I was just so worried. I went through every possible scenario in my head. Like, did I do something? Did somebody call and say I did a bad training? Did I offend somebody? I don't know. Everything that can go through a person's head went through mine. And he asked me this around 9 in the morning, and our meeting wasn't until 4. So my day was shot. So as a leader, please be cognizant of this. People are going to be dreading that meeting with you. So it's really important that you are able to give people a heads up on what the meeting is about. And people will say, well, if I give them time to think about it, then they're going to be upset, or they're going to ask me a bunch of follow-up questions, or they're going to concoct a story. I mean, people really have some strong assumptions about this. But if you have time to prepare, don't you think other people deserve the opportunity to prepare as well instead of ambushing them with something? It's a respectful approach. Turns out my boss, he was just telling me about actually something kind of good. And I told him, I'm like, you really had me scared. I was freaked out the entire day. And it wasn't his intention. So we as leaders have to be mindful that we do have some power and control, and people do get a little bit worried if you ask them for a meeting and don't give them any indication about what the meeting is going to be about. So take the time, set it up, ask permission. Do you have some time at this point? I want to talk to you about this situation. And if they try to ask more questions, just say, this is what it's about. Let's talk about it a little bit more today when we have our meeting. You don't have to go into more detail, but at least give them the opportunity to prepare for what the meeting is actually about. So guys, you have to choose the right place to talk. Don't have a difficult conversation in front of other staff. I had who I would actually consider my best boss that I ever had. He was my boss for a long time. I remember one day, I don't even remember what the conversation was about, and we never had conflict. I don't know if he was in a bad mood. I don't know what was going on, but he asked me a question about something, and I think like I laughed about it or something. I wasn't sure if he was being serious because he asked it in front of the whole group. Man, did he ever lose it on me in front of everybody. He later apologized. He said I should have never done that in a public forum. But I can remember, this is at least 10 years ago, I remember exactly how I felt. I was just frozen. I didn't know what to say. I got some angry tears coming out of my eyes. It was really embarrassing. So save people that embarrassment and have the conversation in private. Use a technique called fronting. So what fronting means is actually getting your body in front of the other person. Don't hide behind a desk. Psychologically, it makes people feel that they're more heard when they can see the other person's body language and you guys are just face to face. So consider pulling your chair around your desk and having the conversation face to face. It also helps minimize distractions of your computer and your cell phone. And you also want to consider holding the meeting in a neutral space. So, if you're the boss and you're having this conversation in your office, it already kind of puts people at a little bit of a disadvantage. So if your intent for this conversation is to build the relationship, consider maybe having it in a neutral place. But if nothing else, bring the chair around. And I also recommend that you place your chair closest to the door, just in case the other person gets very upset, or starts getting really, really angry. I know this sounds kind of cryptic, but you want to make sure that you have easy access out of the room. Also ask yourself, does somebody else need to be involved? Do you need a witness? Have you had the same conversation many times? Does somebody else need to be there for your safety and for the other person's safety? Because remember, we have to protect ourselves too as leaders. 100% be clear about the issue, and do this prior to sitting down face to face and having the conversation with somebody. We all do this. We think we know what we're going to say. We have a loose outline in our head, but that doesn't work. You want to ask yourself two really impactful questions. What exactly is the behavior causing the problem? And what is the impact the behavior is having on you, your team, and your organization? Write that down, read it out loud, study it, recite it, practice it, 5 or 6 times. Ideally, practice it with somebody else. And I promise this will be a huge help to you later as we get into actually sitting down and having the face-to-face conversation. When we're not focused and we start going off on a tangent, it can really, really derail the conversation. And then people can get confused. There might not be a lot of clarity about what you're actually trying to say. So this is the one part I mentioned earlier. You have to plan for the unexpected, but this is one piece that you can 100% prepare for. All right, guys, now we're actually, so imagine that you walked in, you pulled your chair around your desk, you're sitting face to face with the other person, and you actually need to have the conversation. You're starting it. So the first thing you want to do, obviously, is thank the other person for taking the time to meet you. And then you want to state the facts and state only the facts. And this is what we just talked about. Those 2 or 3 succinct lines that you came up with, that you have prepared for and you have planned. You're not making assumptions at this point. You're not going off on a tangent. You're just very clearly identifying what the problem is and what the facts are. I'm not sure if anybody has ever heard of the compliment sandwich before, but I know in my earlier training days as a counselor, we were always kind of told to give a compliment sandwich. And what I mean by that is you'd start off the conversation by saying something really great about the person. You would then state the facts, and then you would end that saying something really great about the person. So for example, I mentioned if Lori was late 5 times, I would say something like, Lori, you are my right-hand woman. I really love working with you. You're one of my best employees. However, you were late on July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. But again, you're such a great asset to this organization. I don't know what I'd do without you. I get that that's a really simplified example, but that just shows how it kind of watered everything down. So what is it? Is Lori the best employee ever? Is that why she's there? Or am I trying to have a conversation with her about her being tardy for work? We want to really avoid the compliment sandwich, even if you've probably been told a bunch of times to do it. That doesn't mean that you don't compliment people throughout the conversation, but at least at the beginning, just make sure that you're stating the facts. After you state those facts, I think there's something really important to do. And remember, when you are calling somebody out on a behavior, they're going to be going into that stress response, that fight or flight response. So their defensiveness is really going to be heightened at this point more than hopefully any time throughout the conversation. So you want to ask, after you state those facts, something like, what's going on? Is everything okay? Because immediately you've taken the conversation from a threatening point to a supportive point of view. So now you might be wanting to address the issues, but you're actually trying to find out, is something else a little deeper going on with you? So you've now become a support person. This step is really important, and it's a step that we all overlook. And I should say in this one, in this opening statement, it is not the time to start with solutions. That is the wrong time. And this is a mistake so many of us make over and over. We talk about the problem and then we immediately go in and tell people everything that they need to change. Don't do that. Resist the urge to do that. After you ask them, is everything okay? What's going on? Can you tell me a little bit more about what's happening? Just listen. Listen to their point of view. Don't interrupt them. All the while, you may be thinking, well, this is total BS. I don't believe them. They're lying. I don't know. You don't have to agree with them, but you do have to listen to them. Pretend that you know absolutely nothing about the situation. Cultivate an attitude of discovery and curiosity. Don't interrupt, just sit and acknowledge. And I like this little analogy here. A good doctor, if you go into the doctor and you're sick, they're going to ask you all about your symptoms before they actually pull out the prescription pad. So think about it like that. Just hear them out. Think about what's going on before you start setting any solutions. And kind of simultaneously with inquiry, we want to acknowledge what they're saying. Guys, people, and you yourself probably feel this way too. People just want to feel that somebody's actually hearing them. I hear this so often at the EAP when if people call in or they talk about their leadership, they just don't feel heard. They feel that, people either don't believe them or they're overlooking their issues or their problems. Now, when somebody says feeling heard, this is something that you have to show. You can't say, I hear you or I understand. And we do this a lot, right? As we're talking to somebody, we say, I get it, I understand, but kind of resist the urge to do that. A great way to show somebody that you've actually heard what they said is to use something like in the counseling world, we call the magic phrase. And that is simply restating what they just said. So let me see if I understand you, Lori. You said that you were late on the 4th, 5th, and 6th because your mother normally watches your children and your mother has been sick. I'm so sorry. That must be really frustrating for you. Doesn't mean you agree. You haven't got to the point of creating solutions yet, but what you did is just reframed what they just said so they can feel like, hey, okay, this person actually heard me. In this point, you can also acknowledge emotions too. So as Lori's talking about the issue with her mother, for example, and her kids, maybe she starts to get visibly upset or really frustrated. It's okay to acknowledge that and say, Lori, it seems like this must be really frustrating for you. And that's it. That's all you have to say. It's all you do in this phase is just kind of acknowledge people's words and acknowledge their emotions. And then we get into problem solving, and problem solving is, this is a lot of back and forth conversation. And this is where people feel like they might get stuck and you might feel that you need to have all of the answers, but you don't. There's some really great questions that you can ask. I think a great one is, well, if you were me, like, what do you think that, you should do, or what should I do? You can always just continue to say, tell me a little bit more, or how can I help you with that? These are great questions to ask. You can ask these in almost any situation. You don't have to have all of the answers for a particular situation, but I believe and research will say asking a question is always a better option than offering a solution. You've probably all been there, right? Like you're just, want to vent maybe to somebody or you're talking to somebody and they keep offering solutions and that's not really where you're at. So asking people more questions is another really great way to make people feel like they're being heard. You want to manage emotions during this time because people are going to become emotional. And unfortunately, so many of us were continued. I mean, I'm 44, so I'm a little bit older. I know definitely I was conditioned in the workplace to believe, leave your emotions at the door. I have been told more than once to stop being emotional. It's just no longer a valid approach in today's work environment. And we need to acknowledge them and manage them and not shame somebody else for expressing emotions. It's a biological response. So I just wanted to take a second here to talk a little bit about handling tears, which is a difficult situation for a lot of leaders. You're not really sure what to do. You know, I know I have. Have you ever felt helpless when someone else cries in front of you? I always say, like, I'm really bad. Like, I really hope people don't cry. Or have you ever cried at work and been embarrassed or wished you hadn't? I've been in both of those situations multiple times. But we just need to remember, you know, an emotion, good definition of an emotion is it's a hardwired biological regulatory function. It's like breathing. We can't really control these. We have emotions to actually make us feel better. It helps us deal with threats. And if you remember back to the brain science piece, anytime somebody is being called on a behavior is going to be, it's going to feel threatening to them initially. So there's 3 different type of tears. There's basal tears. Basal tears are the ones that we just naturally have to lubricate our eyes. Reflex tears, excuse me, are the tears we have, like if we hit our hand with a hammer, we just reflexively cry. And then there's psychic tears. Psychic tears are the tears that we have that communicate our emotions. They're unguarded. They're authentic, and people often just without being able to help it, because remember, it's just a reflex. We cry. It's not anybody's fault. It doesn't make anybody weak. And it's kind of funny, like it's a protein, and women and men have different types of tears. And a lot of times women crying is looked at as a feminine trait, right? So it's suppressed and it's pushed down. And we tell people, don't have that emotion. That emotion isn't good. It makes you look weak. But I'm not trying to make a big comparison between men and women here, but I'm just saying the science. Tears contain a protein that helps mammals produce milk, and women have more of it, and that is contained in tears. So women are going to cry at a higher levels, 4 times more than men actually, and we actually have smaller tear ducts as well. So I mean, like, we're going to cry more often, and it should not be suppressed and pushed down. It's a great opportunity to help recognize people's authentic emotions. And I heard a great tip, and I'm no longer in direct leadership, but I wish I had this tip when I was a leader before. Like, don't keep tissues or water in your office. So if somebody starts crying, you can say, you know what, I'll be right back. I'm just going to run and get you a tissue, get you some water. It gives that person a minute to kind of compose themselves and to, you know, feel a little better, because crying can be a bit embarrassing. But also, like, acknowledging those tears too by saying, like, you know, you seem really upset or you seem really frustrated about this. And it helps us communicate with people. So don't run away from tears. Don't make other people or shame people for crying. It's just a natural reaction. And then after you work through everything, you come up with some solutions, you close, thank people for their time, thank people for the conversation, summarize it. When you're done, before you leave, before that other person leaves, make sure that you ask a couple crucial questions. Have you clearly expressed the action items? What is the person agreeing to? And what are you agreeing to? What support have you committed to providing? Are there any obstacles? Did you schedule a follow-up? And who is going to send a recap? And guys, make sure either you or the other person sends a recap so you have a paper trail of this conversation. It's a necessary evil. We need to have that. You need to protect yourself, and so does the other person. So just about 5 more minutes, I want to talk about some additional tips, some additional considerations. Like, don't have a difficult conversation via email. And I was just doing a meeting with a group of attorneys, and they completely disagreed with me. They said, nope, it's easier for me. I can collect my thoughts. I can write everything down beforehand. I can clearly express what I need. But as we pushed a little bit harder, I mean, it's a cop-out. There's no other way of looking at it. Would all rather send a difficult conversation via email, because we don't have to face the other person face to face and deal with their potential emotions. Everything gets lost in translation in email. Never do it when you're mad or you're giving feedback, or if there's a chance that anything that you might say could be misunderstood. And then I love the concept of mirror neurons. it's I'm not going to go into a lot of it because we don't have a lot of time. But basically, some researchers were doing a project in Italy back in the mid 90s, and they noticed they had some monkeys that were hooked up to some different machine or something. I don't know the specifics, that was measuring something that was happening in the pleasure center of their brain. So every time these researchers would eat or drink something, the monkeys weren't eating or drinking, but the pleasure center in their brain would also light up. So this wasn't the initial reason they were doing the study, but they continued to study this, and they found out that by repeating somebody's behavior or mimicking somebody's behavior, it actually makes the other person feel good. It lights up the pleasure center in their brain. So you can all use mirroring, especially if you're meeting somebody face to face. It's a really cool tip and technique. You really have to think about it, though. I'm not trying to make a political statement here with Obama. I don't care if you like him or hate him. There's just a lot of pictures on the internet that show him mirroring other people, and it's exactly what it sounds like. He is basically just imitating what the other person does, and subconsciously the other person feels that they're more connected. It just brings in a different level of people feeling heard and people feeling connected. I recommend people doing this when they're going into an interview, any type of conversation that you're having with somebody. Mirroring works really great. I guarantee you that Barack Obama is not doing this by accident. He has been conditioned, and he knows how to do this well. So you can see, like, so if I was sitting in front of you, if Patty shifted to the left in her chair, I would subtly, not in a creepy way, shift to the left in my chair. If she brought her hand to her chin, I would subtly, after a couple seconds, bring my hand to my chin. You don't want the other person to know that you're doing it, so you have to do it organically and kind of subtly. But it's a really cool tip and technique that I learned a long time ago, back when I was learning to be a counselor. So try it the next time. Oh, another good tip too is when you're talking to somebody, say the person's name. People love, it gives them pleasure to hear the sound of their own name. So I know it sounds a little bit narcissistic, but we all like that. So you don't want to say it over and over like in a creepy or weird way, but saying it a few times as you're having the conversation with somebody makes them feel, again, more connected to you. And then just some don'ts here, like don't tell people to calm down. It will never calm anybody down. Don't tell somebody to relax or quit getting defensive. It is the worst thing that you can possibly do. Remember, people are going to get defensive. Don't shame them by having emotions that they really can't regulate. We all get defensive when we encounter a threat. Try not to say things like, I understand. You can easily show somebody that you understand by using the magic phrase and paraphrasing what they just said. That's a much better way. It's better to show them you understand rather than just to say, I understand, I understand. It's just not a very impactful thing to do, because it makes people feel more threatened, like, no, you don't understand. So show them. Avoid things like you should, you shouldn't. Don't blame people. Oh, another good thing, don't bring other people into it. Like, don't say something like, well, everybody in the office thinks this way, Lisa. Because of course, Lisa's first thing is going to say, who else thinks that? Just stick with the facts. Don't bring other people into the conversation. And then last but not least, just address thwarting ploys. So obviously, like, some people will, when they're having a conversation, they'll respond with things like silence or sarcasm, or they'll start blaming other people. And we've all probably been in those conversations before. It's one of the most difficult things about a difficult conversation. All the experts will say, address it openly, address it sincerely, disarm that ploy by respectfully labeling it and addressing it. So for example, if Patty's sitting there and she's kind of not saying anything, she's completely shut down, you might want to say, Patty, it seems like you've kind of shut down. I'm not sure how to interpret your silence. Like, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on or how you're feeling? So you're kind of labeling that, you're putting a name to it, and you're calling somebody out at the same time, respectfully. So at the end of the day, just treat people like you want to be treated. People are human beings. We sometimes act a little bit different when we're having these conversations. So just be authentic and true to yourself. And just remember, like, treating people with empathy and kindness, people are always going to remember how you made them feel. So remember, I told you about that great boss that I had that one day sort of went off the rails and yelled at me in front of the group. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I will not forget the way that he made me feel. So this is a good Maya Angelou quote. People will never forget how you made them feel. I will never forget the way that the person that talked to me about my attire that I talked about at the beginning of the conversation, she made me feel so much less embarrassed, and she was actually helpful. So um, you know, I said a lot of stuff in the past 40 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to add to the conversation or disagree with me on anything?
Amy, it's
Amy,
Pat.
it's Pat.
Hi, Patty.
Just want to say it was a wonderful presentation, and thank you. And I know that Keith wanted to say a couple of words about the EAP program.
Sure.
But it was very, very, very good program.
Thanks so much, Patty, and thanks everyone.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Keith Eller, and I'm the account manager for our Workpartners Employee Assistance Program services. Workpartners Employee Assistance Program has been proud to be the preferred EAP provider for the MBA for the last 2.5 years. So I just want to share some information about our EAP services. There's many good reasons for any size company or organization to have an employee assistance program. It is truly a win-win situation for both the company leadership and their employees. At the heart of the employee assistance program is a short-term counseling and referral service that employees and their family members can use for dealing with any personal, family, or work-related stressor. The win for employees is that when problems come up, they have a free confidential counseling program to turn to that's staffed by professional licensed counselors. The win for the leaders and management is that with the help provided their employees by the EAP, they have lower absenteeism rates and higher rates of work productivity. Research studies on EAP programs show absenteeism rates that are 27% lower for companies with an EAP compared to companies that don't have an employee assistance program. So this results in a significant return on your EAP investment. Multiple research studies have shown that for every dollar that is invested in an employee assistance program, the typical return is an investment is $3. So an employee assistance program is a powerful perk that shows your workforce that you are committed to their overall well-being, and that includes their physical, emotional, and financial health. Our Workpartners EAP offers extensive resources to help improve your employees' work and home lives that increases their productivity and reduces your costs. So besides our counseling and work-life services, Workpartners EAP provides a variety of other services that supports both leaders and workers. We have an app that can be downloaded on any smartphone with both behavioral health programs to manage stress as well as lifestyle programs to help with physical activity, nutrition, and smoking cessation. We provide on-site support for any disruptive or critical workplace events. And there's monthly newsletters and webinars on useful and informative topics. And then we have our website that has just a wealth of information for both leaders and their employees. And then Workpartners EAP provides on-site and online leadership training and development to support executive level and the frontline managers. And we're always available for consultation on managerial concerns like performance management and resolving difficult employee situations. So for anyone interested in our EAP services, we offer a very competitive price. Along with our being a preferred EAP provider for the MBA, we also offer a 10% discount off our already competitive price. So if you'd like more information about our EAP services, you can reach me directly by the contact information on your screen. And then my contact information is also listed on the MBA website, on the MBA EAP webpage, and in our Workpartners EAP ads in the business magazine. Well, Amy, again, thank you for your great presentation today. Let me go ahead and turn things back over to Patty.
Great. Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be back on August 12th at 9 a.m. with Logistics Plus to talk about the Logistics Plus services that are available and give you some insider tips on managing your logistics. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and thank you once again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.